but anyway, Peter liked that a lot, and we got to talking, and I said, well, why don't you invite me over to Aix-en-Provence, because that's where he's teaching at the École d'Art d'Aix-en-Provence. I said, why don't you invite me over as a visiting artist, do a gig there? And he said, sure. So what happened, which is really interesting, was that when Port MIT opened, I was in Aix-en-Provence doing, teaching an internet workshop. And so we decided to do a performance night together, from streaming performance from Aix-en-Provence to the screens at MIT, at Port MIT. So that's what we were doing. We were doing See You See Me performances. I was doing some sort of rap thing, and then we had like some sort of artist drummer things and animation. I can't, God knows what else. We were doing sound art pieces. All of this was in a kind of, Peter had this very funny thing. He had a step van, which he had cut apart so that it opened up like a flower in the back, and there was a whole kind of sound stage on it with lights, and he called it Cozy Disco. And then another artist, which is Christian Soucaré, teaches in the robotics department of Aix-en-Provence, had done a huge kind of inflatable balloon tent area so that the whole audience could be inside this balloon while we were streaming audio and video over the internet to MIT. It was unbelievable. It was really funny. And we were also doing this kind of like inviting web jam people, where we were inviting other artists and musicians and sound artists to stream their audio, and that was all being mixed at MIT live, because I gave them a list of URLs to put on the screen, that screen, and whatever. And that's what was happening. So it was a wild kind of like a web jam where there were two nodes, MIT and Aix-en-Provence, and there were performances. People would look at each other or nod, or they'd have an opening or not. People would be talking back and forth and chatting, and then there was some performance happening, and that's basically what happened at MIT. Then for the closing of the MIT show, which I think was in April, because it was in January, maybe it was February, I think someplace, January, February, 1990, God, I can't remember, 1996, maybe it's 96, something like that. Then in March, January, February, March or April, which was the closing of the show, it was like a 3-month show or 2 months, something like that. I was at MIT, and I invited a whole bunch of people to do the same thing, to stream See You See Me, to stream audio, real audio streams and whatever. And I gave them all kind of like, slots, like 15 minutes, this and that. And what happened was really wild, because what I started doing was like, I started to mix. Like I'd have some avant-garde classical musicians doing something and some chat people. And I really started to overlap and mix these kind of, just jamming with it, like live, And this is way before people were doing like, video intermixing, this and that and the other thing. It was just totally on live web jam mixed event, right? But anyway, as a consequence of that, because I had met Peter, who's Peter Sinclair, and we had a great time, going on really well, we decided to collaborate, and we collaborated on several pieces. And one of them, probably the most well-known, is a piece called The Soap Opera for Laptops, and then later IMAX. And this piece was conceived of as 4 robot performers, which the way that we decided to do robot performance was we bought cheap laptops. We put them on radio-controlled cars, the kids have, we took the bodies off the cars, and we just used the bases, so we had like little kind of robots. And then we programmed the computers using primitive text-to-speech and speech recognition, which is in the Apple operating system, so that they would talk to each other. And basically I wrote like all the script in terms of what they would do, and we used the synthetic voices, the native voices, which were Ralph, Fred, Kathy, and Princess. And there was ways, and there still are, but not as robust as it used to be, where you could program them so they would sing songs. You could have them talk with these wild expressions and whatever, or sing and chant at speeds which were impossible for human beings to do. And so a lot of that was basically what the piece was about. And then what happened was that we did a performance at the Les Musiques Festival, which is a kind of a south of France, Marseille, music and arts festival, where we premiered the piece. And basically we had the robot performers on the stage, doing their talking and back and forth and dancing and moving around and whatever, you know, that you could do. And we were kind of off stage using the controllers to make the thing work, and they were the performers. We called them synthespians, like synthetic thespian, synthespians. Anyway, then Peter got wind of using, I can't remember whether it was Cycling 77 Max MSP as a kind of controlling language to use to program the characters a lot better. And so we decided, we continued to work on this piece, and I swear we were doing, at one point we were doing things where we would be on stage and we would be dancing with the computers, or we would be playing guitar and Peter was using pitch tracking so that the computers were actually singing along with the guitar. You know, we were doing all kinds of things with those pieces. And finally we got to the point where we were asked to do installation as well. So we would do a performance, and then we'd take the computers and put them into an installation environment and turn them on. They would talk to each other. And then from there we kind of got into the idea of doing it as installation, where we used the kind of iMac TV computers, which we then put beautiful kind of polyurethane wigs that had sparkling and flocking. We put animated lips that were synced to the phonemes of the words that the computers were speaking. And we put them in kind of living room settings, you know, like velvet couches and chairs, so they would talk to each other. And of course, since it's speech recognition, they would misunderstand the words, so conversation would go off on tangents, you know, or anyway, it was a very kind of a notion of hypertext narrative where it kind of was all circular, and sometimes it made sense and sometimes it would go off. Like one of the characters would be talking about food, and the other one would be singing, and the other one would be talking about sex, because they would misunderstand the words, you know, or they would get it correct. That piece was shown, I think, just recently, 2 years ago at the what the heck is the name of that? Oh, it's the Jeu de Paume in Paris, in a show called Burlesque Contemporain, which was very exciting for me. It had like various other people, like Dennis Oppenheim had like his piece Attempt to Raise Hell, so that was really good. And there was actually a Gordon Mata Clark piece in there, a film called Clock Shower. And these were all about like contemporary artworks which were kind of influenced in one way or another by burlesque. Now, you had asked me actually, Heinrich, who's behind the camera. Hi, Heinrich. The difference between the European art scene, the French art scene, and the American art scene. And one of the things that, I mean, I consider myself to be part of the digital art scene, and by extension part of the French digital art scene. The differences in France in particular, but in Europe in general, is that when you're an artist, you get more support. It's real simple. You can get grants, you can get funding, you can get residencies. These things don't exist in the United States. I mean, or if they did, they've been really severely cut back by all the religious shitheads. The George Bush religious wacko shitheads, you know. So essentially the support structure in Europe is much better for artists in general. I mean, unless you want to work in advertising, or, which a lot of people do now, younger artists now, work in the advertising business. You know, they work doing commercials, or like there's the recent, I just recently collaborated with a video artist who has a studio downstairs, Brian Cayaza, and you know, he does a lot of stuff. He does a lot of stuff for MTV, and he's a terrific guy. It's great fun. But a lot of people now, they do that. They work in both commercial and, so there's a mix between medias, you know, or they're doing a lot of things which I think is kind of interesting, is they're doing viral videos, but they're being paid to do viral videos to put out on the internet. These kind of like stealth commercial things. So it's all kind of an interesting new kind of mix back and forth. But in America in general, they're not as, there's two things that occur. The first thing is that America has a kind of a fashion cycle in the art world, which is really tied to the kind of commodity, art gallery, generational thing. You know, it's like every 10 years it's kind of, that's it. Everybody's, if you have not made success in 10 years, you're like, that's it, it's over for you. You're screwed. So a lot of kids like get out of art school and they're 24, 25, and by the time they're 35, they're has-beens. Nothing left. It's very sad, actually. You know, or they have a 10-year career, and all of a sudden, like, they sell all their art, and then it's gone. Then they don't know what to do. You know, or they have to desperately go and get teaching jobs because there's no support. You know, it's actually really kind of very difficult and sad in a way. I mean, because there's no, the market has essentially taken over everything. In Europe it's a little less because you have these kind of support structures which help you. I mean, you're not going to live well, but you know, you can do more collaborative pieces. You can occupy buildings which are abandoned, which you can then take over and use. I mean, there's something going on in France which I thought was kind of interesting. There's film collaboratives. What they're doing is they're buying or getting 16mm film lab equipment that's being thrown at 35mm film lab equipment, developing printing machines that essentially is being decommissioned or thrown out, and they're taking that equipment and taking it over to their squats and setting up these kind of film labs where any artist can go there, take a residency, if you want to call it, learn the craft of film, which is essentially you shoot the film, you light it, you then put it into developing tanks, and you process the film. It's a very kind of a handmade process. Now this can happen in France, okay, where people can work with that. This cannot happen in the United States. It won't happen. You know, they don't have, you can't get the access to the buildings because any property in the United States, if it's an abandoned building, if you go into to squat it, you get thrown out. Forget it. It's like, it doesn't have the same kind of connotations. Equipment like that, which you're talking about, which would be deaccessioned or decommissioned, in the United States it would be it would be sold immediately and shipped over to China or someplace. You know, there's no way that an artist could ever get their hands on anything like that. You know, so essentially it's a much tighter kind of a thing. And then there's a whole kind of fashion thing. There's a whole kind of gallery, collector, marketing, object circulation system with museums. And all of that is basically about, you know, you have to, as an artist, you have to like figure out some sort of signature style. You have to then put it in the market, whatever that means, or just get a gallery. You have to have it into circulation. It has to be manipulated in some way. Then it winds up in a museum. I mean, that's it. I mean, it's kind of, what happens in America in particular is, but this is true of the whole international art world at the moment, is that you have a lot of kind of high class, high price kind of fetish objects which deal with more or less with some sort of sexual, psychological fetish, you know, my body, you know, my sexual fetish. They deal with some sort of like supposedly transgression, but it's not really. It's got some sort of like, it's recognizable as art, and it's like interchangeable, and so basically it just fits. It's a way to fit into the market without, and the market is more important now than anything else. It's more important in art history. It's more, I mean, on a certain level, not true on the internet or in digital art or new media, but true for most of the art world. And there's a kind of a break or a disjunction, because essentially the art world does not know how to deal with new media.